Arjun Appadurai's Modernity at Large is one of the most influential works in contemporary anthropology and globalization studies. Published in 1996, it offers a deep and complex reflection on how globalization transforms culture, imagination, and social life. The book moves beyond traditional conceptions of globalization as a purely economic or technological process, focusing instead on its cultural dimensions, its impact on identity, and the new forms of social imagination that emerge in a rapidly connected world. Appadurai, an Indian anthropologist trained in the United States, challenges Eurocentric views of modernity, proposing a plural and deterritorialized understanding of modern life. His central claim is that globalization has created new conditions under which people imagine their lives, communities, and futures. In this sense, modernity is no longer a linear process flowing from the West to the rest of the world. Rather, it becomes a disjunctive, multi-centered, and fluid phenomenon. 1. Theoretical foundations. Globalization as disjuncture. Appadurai's framework stands out for replacing the old idea of center and periphery with what he calls disjunctive flows. He argues that globalization is characterized not by uniformity or simple diffusion, but by complex, overlapping, and disjunctive relationships among different dimensions of the modern world. These dimensions interact and conflict, producing unpredictable outcomes. To conceptualize this, Appadurai introduces the famous model of the 5 scapes, a set of global cultural flows that shape modern life. 1. Ethnoscapes, the flow of people, migrants, refugees, tourists, expatriates, and diasporic communities. Human mobility challenges the traditional link between territory, culture, and identity. 2. Mediascapes, the global circulation of images, narratives, and information through media and digital technologies which shape how people imagine other cultures and themselves. 3. Technoscapes, the movement of technologies and technical expertise across borders influencing economies, communication, and warfare. 4. Finance escapes, the rapid and complex flows of global capital, investment, and currency markets, which are volatile and unpredictable. 5. Ideoscapes, the global circulation of ideologies, political values, and discourses such as democracy, human rights, and nationalism. These scapes interact in nonlinear ways, producing disjunctures between economy, politics, culture, and technology. For example, financial globalization might accelerate while cultural or political integration lags behind. Appadurai uses this framework to argue that globalization cannot be understood through a single logic. It is instead a set of overlapping, fragmented, and contested processes. 2. The role of imagination in modernity. A central contribution of modernity at large is the redefinition of imagination as a social practice. For Appadurai, imagination is not simply an individual, creative act. It has become a collective, organized field of social life in the age of globalization. The modern world, saturated by media and migration, gives people unprecedented access to images, narratives, and lifestyles beyond their immediate environment. This new power of imagination allows individuals and groups to envision different lives, to imagine themselves elsewhere, to participate in transnational communities, or to resist dominant narratives. The imagination thus becomes a tool for both domination and emancipation. For example, migrants use imagination to sustain emotional connections with their homeland and to build transnational identities. Conversely, global media industries exploit the same imaginative potential to spread consumerist values and create desires that sustain global capitalism. Appadurai calls this condition the imagination as a social fact, emphasizing its institutionalization through media, advertising, and global cultural production. Unlike earlier modern periods where imagination was restricted to elites, writers, artists, thinkers, today it has become a mass phenomenon, shaping the daily experiences of ordinary people across the planet. 3. Modernity beyond the West, the post-national condition. Another key theme in Appadurai's work is the decentering of modernity. He rejects the traditional Western narrative that portrays modernity as originating in Europe and spreading outward. Instead, he argues that modernity is now produced in multiple sites simultaneously through interactions between local and global processes. This is especially visible in post-colonial societies like India, where global technologies, media, and political ideas mix with traditional cultural practices to create hybrid forms of modern life. In these contexts, Local actors are not passive recipients of Western models. They reinterpret, adapt, and transform them according to their own histories and needs. Appadurai calls this situation the post-national condition, where traditional notions of nationhood and sovereignty are increasingly challenged by transnational networks of people, capital, and information. Diasporic communities, for instance, often maintain strong emotional and cultural ties to their homelands while participating in global economies. This produces what he terms transnational public spheres, in which debates, cultural expressions, and political actions occur beyond the borders of the nation-state. Thus, globalization does not erase cultural differences but reconfigures them. Instead of a homogenized global culture, Appadurai sees a world of heterogeneous, hybrid, and contested modernities. 4. Disjuncture and difference, locality in a global context. Appadurai's notion of locality is also transformed by globalization. Traditionally, anthropologists studied culture in bounded, localized settings, but in the late 20th century, localities themselves become products of global processes. He argues that locality is not a fixed spatial entity, but a relational achievement, something that people continuously produce through social practices, rituals, and discourses. In a world of mass media and migration, the sense of belonging to a place must constantly be constructed and defended against the deterritorializing forces of globalization. For example, a community of Indian migrants in London might reconstruct Indianness through festivals, food, and media, creating a deterritorialized locality that exists both inside and outside the nation-state. Locality, in this sense, becomes a project, not a given. It is imagined, negotiated, and performed in transnational spaces. Globalization and the production of modern subjectivities. Appadurai also connects his theory to the question of identity and subjectivity in the modern world. The global circulation of media and symbols allows individuals to construct identities that are not confined by geography or tradition. People can now imagine themselves as part of global movements, lifestyles, or diasporas. However, this freedom comes with new tensions. Globalization produces both new opportunities for self-realization and new forms of exclusion and anxiety. For some, the global imagination enables empowerment. For others, it leads to alienation, nostalgia, or fundamentalism. In this sense, Appadurai does not romanticize globalization. He emphasizes that the same forces that enable transnational solidarity also produce new forms of inequality, particularly between those who can participate in global flows and those who are excluded from them. This tension, he argues, defines the cultural politics of globalization, the struggle to control the terms under which people imagine their lives and futures. 6. Modernity, media, and globalization. Media play a central role in Appadurai's analysis. The explosion of television, film, and later digital media has created what he calls mediascapes, landscapes of information and images that shape the imagination of people around the globe. These mediascapes allow the poor and marginalized to see images of wealth, power, and freedom that challenge traditional hierarchies. They can inspire migration, social movements, or resistance. Yet they also spread consumerist ideologies and create unrealistic expectations. Appadurai views media as the primary vehicle of global imagination, transforming how people relate to time, space, and identity. In this new media-saturated world, imagination replaces tradition as the central organizing principle of culture. Appadurai's critique of cultural homogenization. Contrary to the pessimistic view that globalization leads to cultural homogenization, Appadurai argues for heterogenization, the proliferation of new cultural forms. Global cultural flows generate hybrid identities and localized adaptations rather than uniformity. For example, Hollywood films may dominate globally, but they are constantly reinterpreted by local audiences who integrate them into their own cultural frameworks. Similarly, global consumer goods like McDonald's or Coca-Cola acquire new meanings in different contexts. In this sense, Appadurai's work offers an optimistic vision of cultural globalization. Despite global inequalities, local creativity and imagination continue to thrive, producing plural modernities rather than a single Western model. 8. Influence and legacy. Since its publication, Modernity at Large has become a foundational text in globalization studies, cultural anthropology, and media theory. Appadurai's concepts of scapes and the imagination as a social fact, have been widely adopted across disciplines, from sociology and communication studies to political theory and cultural geography. His ideas inspired later discussions on transnationalism, diasporic identity, and global media cultures, influencing thinkers like Homi Bhabha, Ulf Hanners, and Saskia Sassen. Moreover, Appadurai's approach helped shift academic debates from seeing globalization as westernization toward understanding it as a complex, multidirectional process of cultural negotiation. 9. Conclusion. Arjun Appadurai's Modernity at Large remains one of the most powerful reinterpretations of globalization and modernity. By emphasizing disjunctive flows, the social role of imagination, and the plurality of modern experiences, Appadurai opens a new perspective on how culture operates in a globalized world. His work reminds us that globalization is not a single story of domination or resistance, but a field of ongoing cultural creativity and struggle. In an era of digital connectivity, migration, and transnational networks, Appadurai's insights remain more relevant than ever, helping us understand how people everywhere imagine their place in the world and how modernity continues to unfold, not from a single center, but from the multiplicity of global voices that inhabit our planet.